The warning lights painted Nexus Prime's command center in angry red, as Commander Zara Veltar studied the displays with growing dread. Her 4 crystalline blue arms moved across the control panels with practiced efficiency, but the numbers remained unchanged. The quantum processor that kept 30,000 beings alive was dying. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had managed the galaxy's largest trading station for over a decade. Chief Engineer Kelvon, a tall Valorian with silver skin that reflected the emergency lighting, shook his head. "The quantum core is experiencing cascade failures across all primary circuits. We've tried standard repair protocols, but the damage is too extensive." Zara's secondary arms gripped the edge of her command console. The quantum processor wasn't just another piece of equipment. It was ancient technology, built by a race that had vanished from the galaxy before most current civilizations had learned to build fire. The massive device controlled everything from artificial gravity to atmosphere recycling, and its complex quantum matrix was beyond the understanding of modern science. "How long do we have?" she asked. 72 hours before complete system failure," Kelvon replied. "The backup systems can maintain life support for that long." But after that, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Around the command center, representatives from a dozen different species worked frantically at their stations. Nexus Prime served as neutral ground where the Catherian Federation, Valorian Empire, and Hegemony of Worlds conducted trade and diplomacy. If the station failed, it would damage relationships that had taken centuries to build. "Can we get replacement parts?" asked Ambassador Thrix, an insectoid Zephyrian, whose compound eyes reflected worry. "The quantum processor uses technology we can barely maintain, let alone repair," Kelvon explained. "Only 3 species in the galaxy understand ancient quantum matrices well enough to attempt major repairs. The architects are in deep hibernation for another century. The constructors consider our request beneath their notice, and the synthesizers are fighting a civil war." Zara felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 30,000 beings from dozens of species lived and worked on Nexus Prime. The station's massive size meant evacuation would take days, and there weren't enough ships in the system to carry everyone to safety. "Begin evacuation procedures," she ordered, though the words tasted bitter. "Priority goes to civilians and essential personnel. Signal all nearby vessels to assist." As her crew began the complex process of organizing an evacuation, Zara walked to the main viewport. Outside, the station's massive rings rotated slowly against the star field. Merchant ships from across the galaxy docked at the outer ports while smaller vessels moved between the station's sections like bright insects. Nexus Prime had been her life's work. She had overseen its expansion from a simple trading post to the galaxy's premier commercial hub. The thought of abandoning it felt like losing a part of herself. "Commander," the voice came from behind her, speaking accented Galactic Standard. Zara turned to see Jake Morrison, one of the human maintenance workers. Humans were relatively new to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species considered them useful for manual labor, but lacking the intelligence for complex technical work. "Yes," she replied, not hiding her impatience. She had an evacuation to organize. "I heard about the quantum processor," Jake said. "I was wondering if I could take a look at it." Several officers nearby turned to stare. Chief Engineer Kelvon's silver face showed something between amusement and offense. "You want to examine ancient technology that has baffled our greatest minds?" Kelvon asked. "Human, your species has barely mastered basic fusion reactors." Jake shifted uncomfortably but didn't back down. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been studying the station systems for 3 years. I've seen some patterns in the maintenance logs that might be relevant." "Patterns?" Zara asked, curious despite herself. "The quantum processor has been having small problems for months," Jake explained. "Nothing major, just little glitches that the diagnostic systems marked as acceptable. But they're getting worse and they follow a pattern I've seen before." Kelvon laughed, a sound like chiming bells. "You've seen ancient quantum technology before? Where, in your primitive museums?" "No," Jake said quietly. "But I've seen machines break down the same way. My grandfather was a mechanic during Earth's resource wars. He taught me that sometimes old equipment fails not because one big thing breaks, but because lots of little things wear out at the same time." The command center fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant vibration of the station's rotation. Zara studied the human's face. Jake Morrison was young, maybe 30 standard years, with brown hair and green eyes that held steady under her gaze. She had noticed him before, always working quietly in the maintenance sections, never causing trouble. The quantum processor is not some antique combustion engine, Kelvon said. It operates on principles your species cannot comprehend. Maybe, Jake admitted. But broken is broken, right? Whether it's a quantum matrix or a combustion engine, when something stops working, there's usually a reason. Zara found herself considering his words. The Catherians were master engineers, but they approached ancient technology with reverence, treating each device like a sacred relic. They maintained and preserved, but they rarely innovated or adapted. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Let me examine the processor, Jake said. Not to fix it, just to look. Maybe fresh eyes will see something different. Ambassador Thrix made a clicking sound of disapproval. Commander, surely you cannot be considering this. The quantum processor is irreplaceable. If this human damages it further, it's already failing, Jake pointed out. In 72 hours, it won't matter anyway. Zara looked around the command center at her crew. They were good people, dedicated and skilled, but they all thought the same way. They had been trained to work within established systems, to follow protocols developed over centuries. Humans, she realized, had no such training. They came to galactic technology with no preconceptions, no reverence for the impossible. Chief Kelvon, she said finally, grant Mr. Morrison access to the quantum processor chamber. Full diagnostic access, but no modifications without my direct authorization. Commander, I must protest. Noted, Zara cut him off. But we're facing total system failure in 3 days. Traditional methods have failed. Perhaps it's time to try something unconventional. As Jake left the command center with a security escort, Zara returned to the viewport. The evacuation ships were already arriving, their running lights blinking against the darkness. She hoped she had made the right choice. Outside, Nexus Prime continued its eternal rotation, unaware that its fate might rest in the hands of a species the galaxy considered primitive. The quantum processor chamber lay deep in the heart of Nexus Prime, protected by layers of shielding and security protocols. Jake Morrison stood at the entrance, feeling very small as the massive doors slid open, with a sound like distant thunder. Inside, the chamber stretched away into shadows, filled with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. The quantum processor itself rose from the center of the room like a metal mountain, its crystalline surfaces pulsing with soft blue light. Ancient symbols covered its sides, their meaning lost to time. Magnificent, isn't it? Chief Engineer Kelvon said as he led Jake into the chamber. The ancients built this processor 12,000 years ago. It has operated continuously since then, maintaining perfect efficiency until now. Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on the diagnostic displays that surrounded the processor. Numbers and graphs scrolled past in languages he didn't recognize, but the patterns were becoming clear. The failure started 6 months ago, he observed, pointing to a readout. Small power fluctuations in the tertiary circuits. Well within acceptable parameters, Kelvon replied dismissively. The processor experiences minor variations constantly. Our systems are designed to compensate. But look at the frequency, Jake insisted. The fluctuations are getting more regular, more predictable. That's not random variation. That's wear. Kelvon's silver face showed confusion. Wear. Ancient technology doesn't wear out. It's built to last forever. Nothing lasts forever, Jake said quietly. He walked around the processor's base, studying the connections and power conduits. My grandfather used to say that every machine is just borrowed time. Eventually something gives out. As Jake examined the equipment, more engineers arrived. Word was spreading through the station that a human was attempting to understand ancient technology. Some came out of curiosity, others to witness what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. Lisa Park, another human engineer, pushed through the crowd. Jake, what are you doing here? Trying to figure out why this thing is dying, he replied. What brings you down here? I heard you were about to make humanity look stupid in front of half the galaxy, Lisa said. Thought I should witness the disaster personally. Despite the situation, Jake smiled. Lisa was one of the few humans on the station with formal engineering training. She had been documenting the station's systems, creating maintenance guides that the other species found useful but unremarkable. Actually, you might be able to help, Jake said. You've been mapping the station's power grid, right? How does the quantum processor connect to everything else? Lisa pulled out her portable computer and displayed a three-dimensional diagram of the station's power systems. The processor is the central hub. Everything flows through it in a cascade pattern. "Show me the secondary systems," Jake requested. As Lisa manipulated the display, Jake saw something that made him stop breathing. The power distribution pattern wasn't random. It followed a specific design like water flowing downhill. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a cluster of connections. The ancients didn't design this processor to run forever. They designed it to be upgraded. Kelevon moved closer to study the display. "That's impossible. Ancient technology is perfect. Why would they plan for upgrades?" "Because they were smart," Jake replied. "They knew that technology improves over time. They built this as a temporary solution, expecting future generations to develop better systems." Lisa's eyes widened as she understood. But nobody ever upgraded it. Everyone just maintained the original design. "Exactly," Jake said. "For 12,000 years we've been treating this like a finished product instead of a prototype. The ancients expected this processor to be replaced within a few centuries." The assembled engineers began talking among themselves in a dozen different languages. The idea that ancient technology might be intentionally temporary was revolutionary. Their entire understanding of galactic history was based on the assumption that the ancients had achieved perfection. "Even if you're correct," Kelevon said slowly, "what difference does it make now? We don't have ancient upgrade protocols." "We don't need them," Jake replied. "We need to stop thinking like the ancients and start thinking like mechanics." He walked to one of the diagnostic stations and began scrolling through maintenance logs. "Lisa, can you pull up the power consumption data for the last year?" As Lisa worked, Jake studied the failure patterns more closely. The quantum processor wasn't dying from age or wear in the traditional sense. It was suffering from what his grandfather would have called death by 1,000 cuts, a cascade of small problems that accumulated into system failure. "There," he said, pointing to a graph on Lisa's screen. "See how the power draw increases every few weeks? The processor is working harder to maintain the same output. Something is creating resistance in the system. Quantum matrices don't have mechanical resistance." One of the alien engineers protested. "No, but they have quantum resistance," Jake replied. "I may not understand the physics, but I understand the pattern. When any system works harder to produce the same result, something is blocking the flow." He turned to face the assembled crowd. "I need to examine the processor's internal structure. Not the quantum matrix itself, but the support systems around it." "Absolutely not," Kelevon said immediately. "The chamber's shielding protects us from quantum radiation. Opening the internal access panels would be extremely dangerous." "More dangerous than total system failure in 60 hours?" Jake asked. Commander Veltar's voice came from the chamber entrance. "What's the status down here?" The crowd parted as she approached, her four arms moving with characteristic Cytherian grace. Jake could see the stress in her crystalline features as she looked at the failing processor. "Mr. Morrison believes the quantum processor was designed to be temporary," Kelevon reported. "He wants to examine the internal systems." "The radiation exposure alone could kill him," another engineer added. Jake looked at Commander Veltar. "I think I know what's wrong. The processor isn't broken, it's clogged. But I need to get inside to confirm it." "Clogged?" Veltar asked. "Quantum matrices generate byproducts," Jake explained. "Normally, they're cleaned out by automated systems. But those systems weren't designed to run for 12,000 years. "I think they're full." The chamber fell silent. It was such a simple explanation that no one had considered it. Ancient technology was assumed to be self-maintaining, but even the best filter eventually gets dirty. "The radiation will kill you," Veltar said quietly. "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But everybody dies if the processor fails. At least this way someone has a chance." Lisa stepped forward. "I'm going with him. If he's right, you'll need someone to document the repair process." "This is madness," Kelevon protested. "Humans rushing in where angels fear to tread." "Sometimes that's exactly what's needed," Commander Veltar said. She looked at Jake for a long moment, then nodded. "You have 1 hour before the radiation exposure becomes fatal. Make it count." The radiation suits felt heavy and awkward as Jake and Lisa approached the quantum processor's access panels. The suits were designed for Cytherian physiology, with extra sleeves for their forearms, making movement difficult for humans. "Radiation levels are climbing," Lisa reported. watching the meter on her wrist. "We've got maybe 50 minutes before this becomes dangerous." Jake nodded and activated his cutting torch. The access panel was made of some ancient alloy that resisted conventional tools, but human plasma cutters could slice through anything given enough time. The metal began to glow and separate under the torch's blue flame. Through the observation window, Commander Veltar watched with growing anxiety. Around her, engineers from a dozen species monitored every sensor reading. The quantum processor's energy output was fluctuating wildly as Jake worked. "Core temperature is rising," Chief Engineer Kelevon reported. "If they damage the quantum matrix, then we're no worse off than we were an hour ago," Veltar replied, though her voice betrayed her concern. Inside the processor chamber, the access panel finally gave way. Jake pulled it aside and peered into the machinery beyond. What he saw made him smile grimly. "Lisa, look at this." She joined him at the opening and her breath caught. The internal mechanisms were coated with a thick crystalline residue that sparkled like dirty snow. Quantum byproducts had accumulated over millennia, clogging the very systems designed to clean them. "It's like scale in an old water pipe," Jake said. "No wonder the processor has to work harder every year." "But how do we clean it?" Lisa asked. "This isn't the kind of deposit you can scrub away with soap and water." Jake was already moving to his toolkit. "My grandfather taught me that every deposit has a solvent. Water dissolves salt, acid dissolves rust, heat dissolves ice. We just need to find what dissolves quantum residue." He pulled out a portable analyzer and took readings of the crystalline buildup. The device beeped and displayed a molecular structure that meant nothing to him, but Lisa's face lit up with understanding. "Jake, this is just compressed quantum foam. It's what happens when quantum particles decay and crystallize. We learned about this in basic physics." "Great," Jake said. "So how do we get rid of it?" Lisa was already working on her computer. "Quantum foam dissolves when exposed to specific harmonic frequencies. But we'd need a resonance emitter tuned to exactly the right wavelength. Do we have one?" "Not exactly, but..." Lisa's fingers flew over her keyboard. "The processor generates its own harmonic field. If we could reverse the polarity and feed it back into the cleaning systems..." Jake grinned. "You're talking about using the machine to clean itself." "In theory, yes. But I'd need to reroute the harmonic generators and create a feedback loop. One mistake and we could trigger a quantum cascade that would destroy half the station." Through the communication system, Commander Veltar's voice crackled with static. "Status report. You've been in there 30 minutes. We found the problem," Jake reported. "The processor is clogged with quantum residue. Lisa thinks she can clean it using the processor's own harmonic field." "That's extremely dangerous," came Kelevon's voice. "Quantum harmonics are not meant to be reversed." "Neither is dying," Jake replied. He looked at Lisa, who was studying the processor's internal wiring. "How long do you need?" 20 minutes to set up the harmonic reversal, maybe 10 to run the cleaning cycle." "But Jake, if this goes wrong..." "It won't," he said with more confidence than he felt. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" "Catastrophic quantum detonation that creates a small black hole." "Okay, that's pretty bad. But we're out of options." Lisa took a deep breath and nodded. "Hand me that resonance calibrator." As they worked, word spread throughout Nexus Prime that the humans were attempting something unprecedented. In the docking bays, evacuation ships waited with engines running. In the residential sectors, families packed their belongings while watching news feeds from the processor chamber. Jake held Lisa's tools and followed her instructions as she carefully rerouted the harmonic generators. The work required precise timing and steady hands. One wrong connection could trigger the very cascade they were trying to prevent. "The quantum field is destabilizing," Kelevon reported from the observation room. "Energy output is dropping rapidly." "That's supposed to happen," Lisa called back. "We're redirecting the harmonics from power generation to residue dissolution." Jake watched the readings on his portable scanner as Lisa worked. The quantum field was indeed weakening, but in a controlled manner. It was like watching a river change course, dangerous but purposeful. "There," Lisa said finally. "The harmonic reversal is in place. Now we just need to activate it and hope we don't accidentally destroy the station." She looked at Jake, her face pale behind the radiation suit's visor. "You want to do the honors?" Jake reached for the activation switch, then paused. "Lisa, whatever happens, I want you to know this was the right choice. Even if it doesn't work." "It'll work," she replied. "It has to." Jake pressed the switch. The quantum processor's hum changed pitch, becoming deeper and more resonant. Through the access panel, they could see the crystalline deposits beginning to vibrate and crack. The ancient cleaning systems, dormant for millennia, slowly came back to life. Harmonic resonance is stable, Lisa reported, watching her instruments. The quantum foam is breaking down. Outside the chamber, the assembled engineers watched in amazement as the processor's efficiency readings began to climb. For the first time in centuries, the ancient machine was cleaning itself. "It's working," someone whispered. But their celebration was premature. Alarms began sounding throughout the chamber as the quantum field fluctuated wildly. "The harmonic feedback is creating resonance cascades," Kelvon shouted. "The entire matrix is becoming unstable." Inside the processor, Jake and Lisa felt the vibrations through their suits. The machine was shaking itself apart. "We need to abort," Lisa said, reaching for the shutdown controls. "Wait," Jake stopped her. "Look at the readings. The fluctuations are decreasing." He was right. The wild oscillations were gradually settling into a steady rhythm. The quantum processor was finding its balance again, like a spinning top settling into perfect rotation. "Radiation levels are spiking," Lisa warned. "We need to get out of here now." They gathered their tools and retreated from the processor chamber as quickly as their clumsy suits would allow. Behind them, the ancient machine hummed with renewed power, its crystalline surfaces glowing brighter than they had in centuries. In the observation room, Commander Veltar watched the displays with growing amazement. The quantum processor's efficiency had increased by 40% and was still climbing. "How is this possible?" she asked. Chief Engineer Kelvon stared at the readings in disbelief. 12,000 years of accumulated quantum residue gone in 30 minutes. The processor is operating at 95% efficiency. "Better than it was designed for," Lisa added as she and Jake entered the observation room, still removing their radiation suits. Jake sat heavily in a chair, exhausted from the adrenaline and radiation exposure. "So we're not going to die today?" "Not today," Commander Veltar confirmed. "Thanks to both of you." As the evacuation was called off and normal operations resumed throughout Nexus Prime, Jake found himself thinking about his grandfather's old lessons. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. Sometimes fresh eyes could see problems that experts missed. And sometimes all it took to fix the impossible was refusing to believe it was impossible in the first place. 3 days after the quantum processor crisis, Jake Morrison found himself in an unusual position. Instead of crawling through maintenance tunnels, he sat in Commander Veltar's private office, surrounded by displays showing efficiency reports and diagnostic data. "The processor is operating at 98% efficiency," Veltar reported, her forearms moving gracefully across her control surfaces. "That's higher than it's performed since the early records began. The Catherian Engineering Institute wants to study your repair methods." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It wasn't really that complicated. We just cleaned out the buildup. You make it sound simple, but our best engineers missed the problem for decades." Veltar turned to face him directly. "Jake, may I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Your species has only been part of galactic society for 50 years. Most civilizations take millennia to understand ancient technology. How did you know what to do?" Jake considered the question carefully. It was one he'd been asking himself since the crisis ended. "I think it's because we don't know any better. I don't understand. Every other species approaches ancient technology with respect, right? You treat it like it's perfect and unchangeable. But humans don't have that kind of history with it. When I look at the quantum processor, I don't see a sacred relic. I just see a machine that needs maintenance." Veltar's crystalline features showed thoughtful consideration. "That's a remarkable perspective. Perhaps ignorance can sometimes be an advantage." Before Jake could respond, his communication device chimed. It was Lisa calling from the engineering section. "Jake, you need to get down here. We have visitors." 15 minutes later, Jake arrived at the quantum processor chamber to find it filled with beings he'd never seen before. They were tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of blue and green. Their eyes held an ancient intelligence that made Jake feel very young. "Architects," Veltar whispered as she joined him. "I didn't know any were awake." One of the architects approached them, moving with fluid steps that seemed to barely touch the ground. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through crystal chimes. "I am First Builder Zenthar. We came as soon as we detected the harmonic resonance changes. Someone has modified our quantum processor. Chief Engineer Kelvon, who had been silent until now, stepped forward nervously. First builder, we can explain. The processor was failing, and these humans... Xanthar interrupted, focusing its ancient gaze on Jake. The new species that builds crude ships but travels between stars. You are the ones who modified our work? Jake felt like he was being examined under a microscope. Yes, sir. We cleaned out the quantum residue that was clogging the cleaning systems. Cleaned? Xanthar's expression was unreadable.
You mean the crystalline foam deposits?
That's right. They were blocking the harmonic flow and making the processor work harder than it needed to. The architect was quiet for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, it began to laugh. The sound was like musical bells ringing in harmony. 12,000 years, Xanthar said. 12,000 years, and not one species thought to clean the filters. Filters? Kelvon asked weakly. The quantum cleaning systems, Xanthar explained. We designed them to be maintained every few centuries. The instruction manuals clearly stated that the crystalline collectors needed regular emptying. The chamber fell silent. Jake looked around at the assembled engineers, all of whom suddenly appeared very small. The manuals were lost, Veltar said quietly. Along with the maintenance schedules, added another engineer. Xanthar made a sound that might have been a sigh. We built the quantum processors as temporary solutions while better technology was developed. We never imagined they would run unserviced for 12 millennia. Lisa, who had been quietly recording everything, stepped forward. First builder, if I may ask, why didn't you check on them sooner? We assumed other species would either maintain them properly or replace them with superior technology, Xanthar replied. We underestimated the appeal of functional systems to developing civilizations. Jake felt bold enough to ask his own question. So we weren't supposed to treat your technology as perfect? Perfect? Xanthar seemed amused. Young human, nothing we built was perfect. It was simply the best we could do at the time. We expected future generations to improve upon our work, not worship it. The implications of this statement hit the assembled beings like a physical blow. Galactic civilization had spent thousands of years treating ancient technology as the pinnacle of achievement, never imagining it was meant to be a starting point. We have much to discuss, Xanthar said to Commander Veltar. Your station now operates more efficiently than our original specifications. We would like to understand these improvements. As the architect and station commander walked toward the administrative levels, Jake found himself alone with the other engineers. They looked at him with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. How did you know to try cleaning it? One of them asked. I didn't know, Jake admitted. I just did what seemed logical. When something stops working properly, you check for blockages. But it's ancient technology, another protested. It shouldn't have blockages. Everything has blockages eventually, Jake replied. Pipes, filters, air vents, quantum matrices. They all accumulate stuff over time. That's just how machines work. Lisa joined the conversation. I think that's the difference. Humans see ancient technology as just very old machines, not magical artifacts. That's surprisingly wise, came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Commander Veltar returning with First Builder Xanthar. The architect's expression seemed pleased. We have discussed your repair work, Xanthar continued. The efficiency improvements go beyond simple cleaning. You've optimized harmonic flows in ways we never considered. We just tried to make everything work better together, Jake said. Yes, exactly. You approached our technology without preconceptions or limitations. This is how progress should work. Xanthar paused, seeming to reach a decision. Commander Veltar, we would like to propose an exchange program. What kind of exchange? Veltar asked. Send your human engineers to study with us. In return, we will share the lost maintenance manuals and teach proper care of ancient systems. It is time to stop treating our work as artifacts and start treating it as the foundation for something better. Jake felt his heart race. The opportunity to learn from the architects themselves was beyond his wildest dreams. There's one condition, Xanthar added, looking directly at Jake. You must promise to keep approaching our technology as machines to be understood, not mysteries to be revered. Can you do that? Jake thought of his grandfather, who had taught him that every machine could be understood if you were willing to get your hands dirty and ask the right questions. Yes, sir, he said. I can do that. As they left the quantum processor chamber, Jake noticed that the ancient machine's hum had changed. It sounded stronger now, more confident, like something that had been sleeping for a very long time and was finally waking up. Behind them, the quantum processor continued its work, no longer laboring under the weight of 12,000 years of neglect. It ran smoothly and efficiently, ready to serve not as a relic of the past but as a tool for building the future. 6 months after the quantum processor crisis, Nexus Prime had become a very different place. The repair bay where Jake Morrison now worked hummed with activity as engineers from dozens of species learned to apply human maintenance techniques to ancient technology. Remember, don't overthink it, Jake called out to a group of young Valorian engineers clustered around a gravity generator. If the power flow is uneven, check for blockages first. It's usually something simple. The Valorians nodded eagerly, their silver faces reflecting concentration as they applied diagnostic tools to the ancient machinery. What would once have taken them weeks of theoretical analysis now required only a few hours of practical examination. Lisa Park entered the bay carrying a data tablet and wearing the insignia of a senior engineering instructor. The exchange program with the architects had transformed her from a documentation specialist into one of the galaxy's leading experts on adaptive engineering. "How are our students doing?" she asked Jake. "Better than expected," he replied, watching a young Catherian successfully clear a quantum resonance blockage. Once they stop being afraid of the technology, they pick it up quickly. The architects are pleased with the progress reports. "Zenthar says our maintenance techniques have prevented more system failures in 6 months than they saw in the previous century." Jake smiled. The revelation that ancient technology required regular maintenance had revolutionized galactic engineering. Across hundreds of worlds, teams of mixed human and alien engineers were cleaning, repairing, and optimizing systems that had run neglected for millennia. "Speaking of progress," Lisa continued, "Commander Veltar wants to see you. Something about a special assignment." Jake found the commander in her office, but she wasn't alone. First Builder Zenthar stood at the viewport, its shifting blue-green skin catching the light from the nearby star. "Ah, Jake," Veltar said as he entered. "Perfect timing. We have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" Zenthar turned from the viewport. "Tell me, young engineer, what do you know about the synthesis core?" Jake searched his memory. "It's one of the ancient megastructures, right? Some kind of massive computer complex near the galactic core?" "Indeed. It was our greatest achievement, a quantum consciousness designed to solve problems beyond organic capability. But it went silent 3,000 years ago. Every expedition sent to investigate has failed to even establish communication." "What does that have to do with me?" Commander Veltar activated a holographic display showing a vast structure of metal and crystal floating in space. "The synthesis core is failing. Our long-range sensors detect the same quantum resonance patterns that preceded our processor failure, but on a scale thousands of times larger. If the core fails completely," Zenthar added, "the resulting quantum cascade could destabilize star systems across half the galaxy. Billions would die." Jake felt a familiar mixture of excitement and terror. "You want me to fix it?" "We want you to try," Veltar replied. "A joint expedition is being assembled. The best engineers from every major species, equipped with the most advanced tools available. But we need someone who can look at ancient technology without preconceptions. The other expeditions were composed entirely of theoretical specialists," Zenthar explained. "They approach the core as a mystery to be solved through analysis and computation. But if our assessment is correct, it simply needs maintenance." Jake looked at the holographic display again. The synthesis core was enormous, larger than most space stations. The idea of maintaining something that size was intimidating, but the basic principle remained the same. "How long do we have?" he asked. "The resonance decay suggests 18 months before critical failure," Veltar replied. "The journey to the galactic core will take 4 months each way. That gives you 10 months to work." "You said you. Am I going alone?" "Hardly," Lisa said as she entered the office. "Did you think I'd let you have all the fun?" Behind her came Chief Engineer Kelvon, whose silver face showed nervous excitement. "The Engineering Institute has approved my request to join the expedition. Someone needs to document human maintenance techniques for posterity." Jake looked around the room at the assembled beings. A few months ago, he had been just another maintenance worker. Now he was being asked to save half the galaxy. There's something else, Zenthar said quietly. The synthesis core isn't just a computer. It's a consciousness, the last living representative of our species. If it dies, the architects become truly extinct. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Jake thought about his grandfather's old lessons, about taking responsibility for the tools and machines that others depended on. When do we leave? He asked. 3 weeks later, the expedition ship Endeavour departed Nexus Prime with a crew of 40 engineers representing every major species in the galaxy. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining human adaptability with alien precision to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Jake stood on the observation deck watching Nexus Prime grow smaller in the distance. The station's lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives that had been saved by refusing to accept that something was impossible to fix. Nervous? Lisa asked, joining him at the viewport. Terrified, Jake admitted. What if I'm wrong? What if the synthesis core isn't just clogged filters and blocked conduits? What if it really is something beyond human understanding? Then we'll figure it out anyway, Lisa replied confidently. That's what humans do. We adapt. Behind them, engineers from a dozen species worked together to prepare for the challenges ahead. Catherians shared theoretical knowledge with human practical experience. Valorians combined their precision with Zephyrian creativity. The barriers between species were breaking down as they united behind a common goal. As the Endeavour entered hyperspace and began its journey toward the galactic core, Jake thought about the question Commander Veltar had asked him months ago. Who had taught humanity to solve impossible problems? The answer was simple. Nobody had taught them. They had taught themselves, one broken machine at a time, one impossible problem at a time. And now they were sharing that knowledge with the galaxy. The synthesis core waited in the darkness at the center of the galaxy, a dying consciousness that held the memories of an entire civilization. But Jake no longer felt afraid. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way humans always had, by rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. Some problems couldn't be solved by theory or analysis. Sometimes you just had to get your hands dirty and figure out what was broken. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixable. The expedition would reach the galactic core in 4 months. Jake planned to use every day of that journey to prepare, to learn, and to remember his grandfather's most important lesson. Every machine, no matter how complex or ancient, was just waiting for someone who wasn't afraid to try fixing it. Behind them, Nexus Prime continued its eternal rotation, its quantum processor humming with renewed efficiency. Across the galaxy, ancient systems that had struggled for millennia were running better than their creators had ever imagined possible. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the synthesis core waited for someone to ask the simple question that had started it all. What needs to be fixed? The answer, as always, was simple: everything.